Hey, anybody out there want to be ugly? Some of you are going too late. I already am. Anybody out there want to be more beautiful than you already are? Some of you going, it's too hard to do. I'm already, no. Here's the deal. We're going to show you today a game plan for how to be more beautiful as a person. But if you're not interested in that and you want to be ugly, we're going to show you how to do that too. Both of those things too. We're in the book of Romans chapter 11. If you need to navigate through your table of contents to find that there. This is kind of part 2 of what we did last week. If you weren't here last week, I would encourage you to get that message and give a listen to it. Take a look at it on our YouTube channel or our podcast. The situation is terrible right now. God's plan to save his people and God's plan to save the world failed by all external appearances. It didn't work. And so when it doesn't work, you're going, well, has God just given up on us? Has God just given up on them? If we reject God, does that mean he rejects us? And the good news that we're going to get here in Romans throughout the whole Bible is just because you reject God doesn't mean he ever rejects you. And there's nobody, no situation, no one who's ever beyond recovery, although at times it'll feel like that. At times it'll feel like, man, this thing is done. This thing is hopeless. There's no hope for this at all. Look at chapter 11. Look at verse 11. Did God's people stumble and fall beyond recovery? Of course not. They were disobedient. So God made salvation available to the Gentiles. How many Gentiles do we have here today? There's a few more of you than that. You don't want to raise your hand. If you don't know it, if you're not a Jewish person, that's all the rest of us. If you're Jewish by ethnicity and culture, then you're not a Gentile pig today. But all the rest of us are Gentile pigs. They were made of disobedience, so God made salvation available to Gentiles. But he wanted his own people, the nation of Israel, to become jealous and claim it for themselves. Now, if the Gentiles were enriched because the people of Israel turned down God's offer of salvation, think how much greater a blessing the world will share when they finally accept it. I'm saying all this especially for you Gentiles. God's appointed me as the apostle of the Gentiles. I stress this for I want somehow to make the people of Israel jealous of what you Gentiles have, so I might save some of them. For since their rejection meant that God offered salvation to the rest of the world, their acceptance will be even more wonderful. It'll be life for those who are dead. You ever been in a situation that felt hopeless? Like it's done, there's no hope for any of this in here? This is what's going on in the world right now. People look around and go, man, God's chosen way to save the world was through his Messiah coming through the nation of Israel. And by and large, the nation of Israel rejected the Messiah, rejected Jesus. Well, we're just done now. Nothing good's going to come out of this. He says, be careful. God is always about 375 million steps ahead of us. He says, just so they rejected it doesn't mean God's rejected them. In fact, he says, look what beautiful thing's going to happen here. Because the Jewish people rejected their Messiah, now all the Gentiles get in on it. And you don't get in on the old way, because the old way was in order to become part of God's chosen people, you had to become a Jewish person, embrace the Jewish culture, Jewish religion, Jewish customs. The Jewish initiation rite for men was circumcision, not baptism, which meant the church had been full of a bunch of women. It was like, that's what you had to do. God says, no more, because they've rejected it now. Now it's available to the whole world only by faith, not by doing the right things, not by having the right ethnic background. None of that matters. So meanwhile, he says, great things have happened for the Gentiles. But he says, but check this out. Imagine if God saved the whole world when his chosen people rejected him. Think how amazing it's going to be when they accept him. And he says, that's going to happen at some point. It's recorded in different places in the Bible. At the end of chapter 11 here in Romans, we've already looked at this in some detail, but it tells us very clearly there's coming a day when the Jewish nation is going to say, that Messiah that we rejected back in year 1, back when the calendar changed and it changed everything, by and large, and this is not to put down the Jewish people today or to shame any of that, but they would just tell you, no, Jesus is not the Messiah. There's another Messiah that's coming someday for us. It is not Jesus. God makes it very clear at some point they're going to go, wait a minute. And as a whole, they're going to embrace Jesus as their Messiah. He says, when that happens, think how amazing that's going to be. But meanwhile, we're stuck in this place where today now he's telling us Gentile pigs, us Gentiles are now the chosen people of God. Look at verse 16. And since Abraham and the other patriarchs, that's the people who founded the Jewish nation, who God started with, were holy, their descendants will also be holy, just as the entire batch of dough is holy, because the portion given as an offering is holy. That's back when they gave money and gave stuff to the church. This wasn't cash in their society, and they recognized that everything is holy to God. Their whole harvest is holy, but they didn't bring in semi-trucks and bring it to God and go, we're asking you to, this is holy, and back them all up. They would bring a small portion of it, give it to God, and say, this is all yours. This is a symbol of the fact that everything we have is from you. And then he switches the analogy from agriculture, like offerings and livestock, to olive trees. For if the roots of the tree are holy, the branches will be true. But, you can hear it like a courtroom drama, objection, some of these branches from Abraham's tree, the nation of Israel he's talking about here, some of the people of Israel have been broken off. And you Gentiles, who were branches from a wild olive tree, in your own Bible or on your note sheet there, you can write down the word janky, nasty branches. Like sketchy, nasty branches. Wild olive have been grafted in. So now you also receive the blessing God has promised Abraham and his children, sharing in the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. But you must not brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that are broken off. You're just a branch, not the root. He says this, there were outsiders. They're the insiders, the natural branches growing off of God's designer tree. The nation of Israel, it had all the fertilizer, all the nutrients, sprayed for insects and diseases, carefully pruned. It was like the designer tree. Been featured in all the magazines, featured like on the website. That's amazing out there. And he said, over here, that's God's chosen people. Over here, you and me. Janky, nasty branches. Branches growing in the wild. Sometimes those trees, those branches would bear fruit, but even if they did produce fruit, it wasn't very much. And it was usually kind of nasty and gnarly, had bugs in it and disease in it and stuff like that. It was just kind of whatever. He said, so here's what God did. He did something crazy. You janky, nasty branches over here, he grafted you in to his cultivated tree over here. Take a look at the picture up here. That's a graft of an olive tree, olive branch, into the branch of an established olive tree. Whenever they graft something in, they still do this today. You take this branch from something else because you want something it has, or maybe we want this to grow over here, and we take it and put it over here. We strip it all back. It doesn't feel good to that branch. If the branch has feelings and nerves and all, it wouldn't feel very good. And it would take a long time before that branch bears any fruit. It's an important thing to keep in mind, to watch the parallel here of your relationship with God. We sometimes want, God, I'm a Christian now, let's go. And God's going to go, patience, dude. It might take some time, you janky, nasty branch, before you're going to be able to bear any fruit. But when you're grafted into God's tree over here, now all of a sudden you share in the nourishment from the roots of that tree, from a healthy tree that has been that has diseases that's been taken care of, the bugs are taken care of out there, and it's going to produce now not janky, nasty fruit, but quality and quantity kind of fruit. That's going to be beautiful and amazing. He says, oh, it's starting to happen, and you Gentiles, and the Gentiles hear and go, that's weird. Yeah, I became a Christian. That's weird. He's right. I was over here with just janky, whatever stuff. Man, look what God's done over here. So he said, that's all happened here. But he says, and be careful. Don't brag about how awesome and cool you are because you're now part of the tree. Well, you may say, look at verse 19, those branches are broken off to make room for me. This is a nanny kind of thing they're doing here. Yes, but remember, those branches are broken off because they didn't believe in Christ. And you are there because you do believe. So here's the second warning he gives on pride. Back in verse 18, he says, you must not brag. Here in verse 20, he says, don't think highly of yourself, but fear what could happen. For if God did not spare the original branches, he ain't going to spare you either, pal. He's going to tell us, look, the only reason he's going to tell us, you janky, nasty Gentile branches are in God's cultivated, God's designer tree, because you said yes to Jesus, because you had faith. It wasn't because you were inherently good in and of yourself. And it wasn't because you did a bunch of good things. All these good things you did now that are being produced out of your life isn't what made you a branch. The reason you produced those good things is because God grafted you in by faith, not because you behaved your way in. Because you produced enough good fruit, got yourself cleaned up and got in. None of that's the case. He said, be careful. You're there because you believe. You stop believing, you'll make the mistake that Israel did back when Jesus showed up, because they thought we're the chosen people. They thought there was something inherently good about them, and because they had all the rules and the laws and they kept a lot of those rules and laws, they said, this is what qualifies us to get in and be part of God's chosen people. God says, you're in this tree because I put you in this tree. You're not there because you put yourself in there. You didn't believe this enough. You didn't behave this enough. You're there because by faith you said yes to Jesus. He says, if God didn't spare the original branches and cut them off, you Gentiles are in now, you start to get proud about yourself and think, well, we're pretty cool here. Look what's happening in our lives. You get proud, God will cut you off if you're not careful. Verse 22. Notice, whenever the Bible says notice, what are we supposed to do? Notice, yeah. That means, I would put, like, if you have a highlighter or have a pen there, underline this next little phrase here. Notice how God is both kind and severe. Both kind and severe. He is severe toward those who disobeyed, but kind to you if you continue to trust in his kindness. He's saying, look, you do things that are wrong and you reject God, bad things are going to happen to you. You trust God and put your faith in him, good things will happen to you. But God's both kind and severe. There's both punishment and reward with God, not just one or the other. But if you stop trusting, you'll also be cut off. And if the people of Israel turn from their unbelief, they'll be grafted in again. For God has the power to graft them back into the tree. You, by nature, were a branch cut from a wild, janky, nasty, sketchy olive tree. So if God was willing to do something contrary to nature by grafting you into his designer tree, into his cultivated tree, he'll be far more eager to graft the original branches back into the tree where they belong. Here's what he's telling us right now. You Gentiles, which is all of us today, getting us into God's chosen people wasn't an easy thing. It was kind of janky and nasty because we had all kinds of pagan stuff we were doing, all kinds of dumb religious practices, all that kind of stuff. It says, especially at the beginning, these Gentiles getting in, that you were not natural here. You didn't fit into this thing. It was hard. It was difficult. And if God was willing to welcome you into his family, you janky, nasty, sketchy people, the original branches that were born out of what he put together with the nation of Israel, they're cut off right now, but they'll be far more eager to get back in at some point. Far more eager, it's far easier to get in the natural branches. I want you to understand this mystery, dear brothers and sisters, so that you will not feel proud about yourselves. You see that right there? That's the third time in about 7 verses he said, hey, be careful. Be careful about pride. Be careful about when you've had success in your life. When you've had success in your life, that's the easiest time to get ugly. If you, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands today, but you can raise your hands mentally. Some of you have great families and great kids, right? Great families, great kids. Some of you have achieved some success in the business world and your career financially. Some of you have achieved success in the education and in school, things like that. Success in the culture, in the world, in the workplace, with your health and all that. And if we're not careful, we will look down on others from our privileged place and think, look at those stupid people. Here's how you'll know you have this ugly virus called pride that gets in your soul that will take a beautiful branch and make it nasty. You start to think, well, if they would just do it my way, if they'll just read the books I read and go to the church I go to, if they would just follow me, then they could have the same things I have. The slippery slope, the slide into pride, I'm going to give it to you here today, just as a grid just to watch out for, the warning signs of this, because we tend to think of pride. We know some people that are prideful, right? We know some people, and they kind of sounded obvious. I'm telling you, it's an insidious, quiet little thing that sneaks in there, and you don't even see it coming. It starts off whenever you've had success in your life, again, in your relationship with God, how he's turned your life around, your finances, your family, whatever it is. The first thing that'll happen when you go, dang, this is awesome, is blessed, lucky, and privileged. Blessed, lucky, and privileged. Dudes, men in the house, remember when she said yes to going on a date with you and you couldn't believe it? And then she said yes again and again and again. Man, you're blessed, lucky, privileged. But what happens after a while in a marriage? When you're blessed, lucky, and privileged, well, you know what happens? Number two, what happens is it just becomes an expectation. Well, you just take it for granted. Take her for granted. It's not even a bad thing. That's just natural, normal. Good things happen in your life, in your business, in your relationship with God. When good things happen, you start just to assume, well, this is just kind of how it is now. And that's not even necessarily wrong or bad. It's where we get to the third step on this progression is when expectation moves to entitlement. When entitlement happens, when we think we earned it or we deserved it. Look what we did here. We will see this happen, guys. I'll watch this happen in people's financial lives, in their marriage lives. They will do things, even in their relationship with God. You'll have people in your small group. We just started small groups here. If you're not in a small group yet, you should get in one. If you're newer here, we got room for you. Jump into one. But here's what will happen. You'll see people in your small group, and they've been a Christian for a while, probably not as long as you, or maybe even longer than you, and it'll be like, what's wrong with them? And the reason you think that, because you think the reason you have a good marriage or good finances and all that is because you did it. You achieved it. You worked hard. And people will go, well, but I did work hard. Yeah, you did work hard, but who let you be born in America? Who let you have a healthy body and a healthy mind? Who let you have that kind of job there? Who looked the other way on some dumb things that you got away with? Who let all that happen for you? In the book of Deuteronomy, it's Deuteronomy 31, somewhere in there, it says this. God tells his people, hey, nation of Israel, you're just a nation of slaves. For 400 years, you got nothing, no hope for this. But when you get to the land I'm giving you, you'll begin to experience success. And you'll build vineyards and homes. And it'll be beautiful and amazing. He says, but that's the time to be careful. Because you'll start to think, I did this. I deserve this. And then we move into pride. And pride is this deadly virus that gets in there that makes a mess out of things. But you can see all kinds of symbols of this and signs of this in people who you know. Maybe people that are in your family, people in your workplace, people in your classrooms at school. Let's just chat for a bit here about church and our relationship with God and how this works. Remember, all of us at one point, we were one of the outsiders. We were one of the others out there. And I've watched this happen. I've done this dumb thing, and I've watched it happen here, even at Crosspoint Church over the years. People who, a year ago, lives were a mess and whatever, and they had a faith experience, and God saved them. They got baptized, joined a small group, all on fire for God, and less than a year later, they're going, what's wrong with my friends? What's wrong with those people over there? Start to look down on people. Going like, that was you, dude, a year ago. We can so easily forget. And the longer you're a Christian, if you're not careful, the easier it is to see people out there and go, what is wrong with that moron, that fool, that whatever, that kind of thing. And guys, I've seen this happen in my lifetime. Great movements of God. Some of them happened right here in California where God raised up by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, God reached the outsiders through these ministries that were just amazing and powerful and beautiful. You know what's happened in 1 or 2 generations? Some of those same churches that were started out of reaching outsiders now go, I'm not sure we want them in here. You know why? It's because now you're a Christian and now you have kids and you want to protect your children from those evil outsiders there. What if they bring that stuff in here? What if they do this? Oh, no, they can come in here, but they got to change first. Instead of saying, hey, they can come in here no matter what, with all the janky nastiness of their life, and let them, a place here that says you don't have to behave in order to belong. You don't even have to believe in order to belong to start. You just can come in here and just let this get in you, on you, and through you. And it sounds really godly and spiritual. I've said these kind of dumb things. So I'm just confessing, doing some therapy with you guys today. Just be super careful of this. Whether you've been a Christian a long time or a little time, it's so easy to do this, to hear things like this. Man, we're not into that easy believism stuff at our church. And we're committed. We have people that are committed to Christ, not that easy believism stuff where just weak faith is just silly and shallow and all that. And it's interesting. I get that. People say that. I go, but do you realize the guy who started the whole thing 2,000 years ago said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He said, you don't need rugged faith. You know what he said you need? What kind of faith you have? If I had a mustard seed on my finger and none of you could see it, it looks like a piece of lint. She said, that's all you need to have. And it's all the whole thing. We don't want pansy Christians here. We don't want complacent faith here. We want people on fire, warriors for Christ. We're into discipleship. And if you're newer to this, you're going, wait, they have a boat here? We have to get on a boat called Disciple to, sorry, it didn't work at the first service either. We want warriors. And guys, we believe in discipleship. We want you to grow in your faith. But we've got to be so careful with people that are just brand new. Or, here's where it's crazy, where people who've been around church for a number of years who didn't grow at the same pace you did. And we'll look down on them and go, what's wrong with them? And forget who we were, that we got grafted in to God's designer tree. And instead of saying, wow, we go, what's wrong with those people? We look at the great results of things going on in our life, and we'll forget the process of what it took to get me here. And in order to feel better about myself, I'll start to look down on other people, that entitlement, that pride that gets in there. And what we start off, both look at me, as individuals and us collectively as a church, what starts off being beautiful gets ugly. Because pride is not just wrong, it's ugly. What it does to you as an individual, what it does to a church, collectively, when that pride virus gets in there. So in order, I want to help you today with whether it's an extreme makeover we're going to do with tools to use to make yourself beautiful, or we're going to use the idea of like an olive tree and agriculture, what we need to cultivate in our lives. Here's what we need to cultivate to stay beautiful or to get beautiful. If you don't want to be beautiful, just do the opposite of all this stuff. We need to cultivate, first of all, a good memory. We need to cultivate a good memory. The number of times Paul here in Romans 11, Romans chapter 1, flies in the face of what our culture tells us. Flies in the face of what your children are being told, that they're beautiful and they're awesome and amazing, and don't let everybody tell you that you to be true to yourself. Just love yourself. I'm thinking, you shouldn't love yourself. Jesus says don't love yourself because yourself is janky, nasty, gross. You don't love yourself. You have to die to yourself. The only hope you have. So we need to cultivate a good memory. And Paul reminds them here again, remember what you were. Now, some good things have happened in your life, but remember where you were before faith came alive in your heart, before God saved you by his grace. Now, important here, quick note here, don't focus on what you were, because some of you have focused too much on what you were, and the enemy, Satan and demons use stuff, and they use that to like push you down and shame and guilt and keep you there. It's don't focus on what you were, but don't ever forget what you were. Don't ever forget what you were. I'm telling you right now, the longer, you might want to write this down. I didn't get it up on the screen. Somebody told me you should have had it up on the screen. So how are you going to write this down? The longer you walk with Jesus, the more blown away you'll be that he saved you in the first place. The sign of maturity in your faith is not looking down at people and go, what's wrong with them? You'll be, the longer you walk with Jesus, the more blown away that you'll be that he saved you in the first place. You'll have more of a sense of that. Paul, it's interesting. Paul writes these letters that are recorded for us in the Bible, but they're not in the Bible in the order that he wrote them and sent them. But we look back at that and we can kind of look back on how he wrote them. You know how Paul starts off his letters at the beginning when he first writes letters? He says, this letter is from Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. That's how he starts. Some years go by and he grows in his faith and maturity. You know what he gets to 7, 8, 9 years later? This letter is from Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ. This letter is from Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ. And one of the last letters he writes to a guy named Timothy, he says, I can't believe this. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. I'm the worst of all. A guy who writes half the New Testament. Worst of all, one of the greatest signs of maturity in your life is not that you're blown away by how great you are, but how I can't believe what God did to save me. Can't believe what God did to save me. Which will then in turn infuse number 2, the second tool or makeover you want to do is gratitude. To remember where you were and to look at where you are now and go, I can't believe this. I can't believe what God did to save me. In verse 17, he says they've been broken off, and you Gentiles, you've been now grafted in. Look what it's meant for you. Share in all the great blessings of God just because you said yes to Jesus, but just because you had faith. One of the tools that I've used in my life to try to cultivate gratitude is what I call the gratitude challenge. I got my picture of mine up on the screen here. You get a blank piece of paper. However old you are, come up with that many things you're grateful for. Now, I haven't done this in a while because my granddaughter should be on there, and she's not. I'm doing a new one this week. But as you do this, like you'll have things up there like the gospel and Denise and all that. You'll certain things. One of the things you'll do as you do this gratitude challenge is you go, dang. I was a 22-year-old. I didn't even have a nice testimony of some janky, nasty testimony that I had. I was just not a Jesus freak, I was a Jesus nerd. I believed in God, but I didn't know what my life was going to do. I had no idea. Living in a trailer in San Marcos, California, and just watch now, as I look back on it now, the people that God led me to, the people who looked at me and said, I believe in you, I'm going to trust you, I'm going to disciple you, I'm going to mentor you. You do that and you get the people that got you to where you are right now. There's a funny little phrase, a funny little saying that goes, if you see a turtle on a post, what do you know? Someone put it there. Any success you've had in your life, that gratitude challenge will keep you grateful for that. Now, as you're grateful for that, you go, God, I'm so thank you. I'm just grateful. Now, you got to be careful with this. Because if you start being grateful about things, you can start look at other people and compare yourself to them and go, God, I thank you. I'm not like that anymore. Jesus tells a story about this in Luke. He says this. 2 guys went to church to pray one day. One guy stood over here and said, God, I thank you. Great start to a prayer. God, thank you. And he starts off, God, I thank you. I'm not like, and he's so far so good. But instead of God, I thank you. I'm not like how I used to be. God, I thank you. I'm not like that guy over there. I'm telling you guys, you say we don't want to ever do that. I'm just telling you, it's a natural thing to look at other people and go, man, I'm glad our marriage, our finances, our character is not like those people out there. So careful. On the other hand, Jesus says, there's another dude that stood over here. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That needs to be the prayer of our lives, God, whether you're brand new at following Jesus, you met at 67 years. Just be blown away that John Newton, famous guy who wrote the song Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. We sing it like crazy. Even people who go to church know that song. At the end of his life, towards the end of his life, he suffered from dementia where his mind was just gone and he was not there very often, but one of the last things he was recorded as saying was this. He said, my mind is gone now. Most days I can't keep track of who you are and what's going on here. But here's the one thing I know. I am a great sinner, and he is a great Savior. Because if you ever forget anything in your life, just keep that in mind. And some of you are going, well, I'm not a great sinner because I was raised going to church and I went to Awanas and I got the perfect attendance pins. Like, you're the worst of all. No, seriously, that's me. Because look, the people that, the janky, the nasty, rebellious people came to Jesus like crazy. You know who killed Jesus? The people who came to church on Sunday morning. The religious people that thought they had their act together. Thought, we're not so bad. We're not so bad. We're not so bad. I'm just telling you, some of you need to recognize the fact that God saved me out of self-righteousness. Saved me out of thinking I was okay and I really wasn't that big of a deal. It was probably the biggest work of grace that could ever be done in somebody's life. Number 3, you need to cultivate a fear and love of God and for God. Remember it says there in verse 22, notice how God is both kind and severe. We need both of those things in our life. And the tricky part is we'll tend to focus on one of them over the other. Usually it's in reaction to somebody emphasizing it too much over here. I don't know about you. I grew up going to church. It was about hellfire and brimstone and wrath of God and judgment of God and fear of God. And we hardly ever heard about love God, love God, love God. So there's fear and not. So then what has happened here in America, there's a lot of churches back when I was a kid. What's happened now is it's kind of over here. And in Western evangelicalism today, here's what we focus on. We don't talk about fear of God at all. We talk about the love of God. Paul says we need both of those things. We need to have both fear of God and love of God. Like we need to understand that when Jesus says this, Jesus says, if you want to know how to please me, here's the top thing you do to please me. He does not say, believe in me, trust in me, obey me, sacrifice for me, give to me. You know what he says? Love me. And that love is not just dutiful kind of love. What this love is the love that says, I am stoked and excited about Jesus. When you get stoked and excited about Jesus, you know what happens? Obedience, service, giving, sacrifice, all that stuff will just flow out of the fact that I just love him. So loving God is crazy, crazy important. But he also tells us we need to fear God. From time to time, well-meaning people trying to soften the edges of what Jesus says will say things like this. Well, God doesn't want us to be like afraid of him and fear him. The word doesn't mean like be afraid of him. It means like worship or reverence or respect. The only problem with that is that in the Bible, in the Greek and the Hebrew language, which is the Bible was originally written in, there are words for worship, reverence, and respect. And we're told frequently to worship, reverence, and respect God. But we're told over 300 times, fear God. You know what fear God means? Be afraid. Understand who this is you are dealing with. Because when you get that all wrong, you'll kind of be presumptuous about his love and think, well, I just get away with it again. God doesn't really mean what he says. No, fear means be afraid. Probably the best analogy for this is parents. Dads and moms, right? You need kids that both fear you and love you. If you have just one or the other, you have a mess on your hands. You can't just have fear. That's dysfunctional and terrible and terrifying. And you can't just have love that excuses everything and just pats them on the shoulder and says, oh, just go sit in timeout for 30 seconds and go back and do it again. You need fear and love. The reason you need fear and love is so that your child can experience your love. So when they run out in the street and dad says, hey, stop it right now, you don't go, well, give me an explanation for that, Dad. At some point, God's going to say, what it means to fear me is, because I said so, pal, that's why. That's the only reason you need. Now, when you put fear and love together, those things work in great dynamic tension with each other. The reason I'm going to fear him because I know he loves me and I can trust him enough. But both these things have to be in great dynamic tension with each other. And then we need to cultivate number 4, astonishment. I don't like astonishment. I like to figure things out. That's my personality, how I'm wired. I want to figure it all out. Here in the book of Romans, especially Romans 9 to 11, there's lots in here that's tricky. In fact, I actually got some books on the book of Romans in preparation for this series. I even went and listened to a couple of churches that got there because there's some tricky, gnarly stuff here, especially in Romans 9 to 11. That's 3 chapters of the Bible. A lot of the books and a lot of the churches I went and listened to, you know how many messages they did in Romans 9 to 11? 1. Just summarized it all. And that's not a bad thing. They just go, oh, it's too much, too difficult. The reason why is because there's some hard things to explain in here. There's some difficult things about God's sovereignty and that God chooses some and doesn't choose others, and that the nation of Israel he says he's imprisoned everyone in disobedience. He can have mercy on everyone. You go, I don't understand all that. He goes, I want you to embrace the mystery, folks. I want you to embrace the mystery of all this. Because Paul never explains it to all our questions to any of my satisfaction. When I go, God, I don't get this, I don't understand this, here's Paul's response. Oh, verse 33. Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge. How impossible, not improbable, not how difficult, not how challenging, how impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. For who can know the Lord's thoughts? No hand should go up right now. Who knows enough to give him advice? Who's given him so much he needs to pay it back? For everything comes from him, exists by his power, and is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever and ever. What that means is there's some things we go, God, I don't get this, and I don't have to. I'm just going to be astonished by this. And don't you want a God like that? A God you could get all figured out? Pfft, who wants that? If I could figure God out, he wouldn't be God. He'd just be some version of me. He's just blown away by this. It goes beyond comprehension. Back in like the late 60s, 70s, Christian music in churches was shifting from, some of you grew up going to church with hymn books, right? Anybody do hymn books in your church? A few of you, yeah. Hymn books there with all the verses there. You had to turn to a page and do all that kind of stuff. And then there was this thing with the advent of rock and roll music and guitars and drums, stuff like that. They started writing what they called praise choruses. And they call these songs 7-11 songs. 7 words, 11 times. Having fun with it. But there's a power. I'm not making fun of them, but they were simple songs. Sometimes you needed those because like some of the hymns were like, I don't even know what this means. Here I raise my Ebenezer. Here, what does I even know what that means? So good on that. But I came across a guy back when I was finally getting serious about my faith. And singing some of those songs. They were kind of meaningful. A guy named Michael Card. You might want to look him up. He's older than I am right now, so he's an old dude. Wrote all kinds of great songs that had deep theology and stuff. And he wrote a song called God's Own Fool. Here's the lyrics. They'll be up on the screen. It seems I've imagined him all of my life as the wisest of all of mankind. But if God's holy wisdom is foolish to men, he must have seemed out of his mind. For even his family said he was mad, and the priests said a demon's to blame. But God, in the form of this angry young man, could not have seemed perfectly sane. So, come lose your life for a carpenter's son, for a madman who died for a dream, and you'll have the faith his first followers had, and you'll feel the weight of the beam. So, surrender the hunger to say, you must know. Have the courage to say, I believe, for the power of paradox opens our eyes and blinds those who say they can see. When we, in our foolishness, thought we were wise, he played the fool and he opened our eyes. When we, in our weakness, believed we were strong, he became helpless to show we were wrong. And so we follow God's own fool, for only the foolish can tell. Believe the unbelievable. Come be a fool as well. Just be astonished by all this. Karl Barth is a famous theologian. He's passed away now. But back in the day, he would lecture at all the famous universities all over the world. And these guys that are famous theologians are smart, right, for college universities, write like 7, 8 syllable words. I mean, it's crazy, all the stuff they do here. There. He would lecture all over the world, and they go to big, huge auditoriums, and they would do some question and answer stuff. And inevitably, they would ask these questions. So Karl Barth, you've written books that are like it covered this back wall back here. They're just beautiful, amazing, profound stuff. What's the most profound theological, philosophical thing you've ever heard? And he would try to do it. And they said at one point, it was said that he answered. He just paused one time and said, well, the most profound thing I've ever heard, philosophically, theologically, Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Simple little children's song, the most profound theological thing you'll ever want to know. The fifth tool to use to stay beautiful in your faith is worship. Worship in our songs, worship. We're going to take some time to sing some songs today and worship God today. It reminds us that God's God and we're not. We're going to sing a song called Not to Us. Some places it's not to you, but to our name be the glory. We're going to get out of that stuff. That's what pride says. We're going to give you a chance to come and receive prayer. In the back of the room, there's 4 chairs back there where some people on our prayer team will be. If you came in today carrying some stuff, you need some help with anything, go back there and just pray. Let them pray with you and pray for you about that. And then we're going to invite you to tables of communion. It's in the 4 corners of the room where you could get a piece of bread and get some juice that symbolizes the body and the blood of Jesus. Don't miss this. Back when our church first started, we were meeting at Day Middle School, and we started to do communion at the end of the service. We thought, but we wanted to it's just so much work to do the offering and communion and all that. So we thought, what if we just did this? Let's put the buckets at communion stations. People could bring their connection card there, and they're giving there and come receive communion. It would just expedite things. We thought about it for a bit and thought, no. When you come to tables of communion, you come with nothing. You don't put your connection card in there. You don't put your giving. You don't do any of that stuff. You got to come with empty hands, which will keep you humble. To recognize, I bring nothing. I bring nothing to this. If you're not a Christian today, it might be time for you to step over that line of faith and say yes to Jesus on that connection card that Justin talked about. Let's talk about that, what that means to take that next step of faith. And communion just celebrates the fact that we bring nothing to get ourselves right with God. He and He alone does it. But guys, as we sing today, worship is more than just music. It certainly is music and songs, but it's more than that. What worship is that these lyrics of these songs, the lyrics of the songs that are recorded in the Bible for us, are designed to be the things that express the deepest desires of our hearts. And we say, God, we want these things to be true, not just coming out of our mouths in a church service. We want it to be true in our lives, in our everyday lives. God, we want it to be true, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be all the glory. Some nations boast of their chariots and horses, but we boast in the name of the Lord our God. The best equipped army cannot save a king, nor is great strength enough to save a warrior. Don't count on your war horse to give you victory. For all its strength, it cannot save you. But the Lord watches over those who fear him, those who rely on his unfailing love. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone. I will boast only in the Lord. Let all who are helpless take heart. Can we boast that we've done anything to be accepted by God? God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things that we have done, so none of us can boast, for we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. If you want to boast, boast only about the Lord. Don't let the wise boast in their wisdom, or the powerful boast in their power, or the rich boast in their riches. But those who wish to boast should boast in this alone, that they truly know me and understand that I am the Lord, who demonstrates unfailing love and who brings justice and righteousness to the earth, and that I delight in these things. And as for me, may I never boast about anything except the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world.